Imagine a young genius solving a theory that baffled the greatest minds of the world. Using one simple idea, you won't believe how it all unfolds. Watch this mind-blowing story explained. The film begins with a PhD student named Margaret. We learn that Margaret is 25 years old and studies mathematics. Her dissertation is focused on a mathematical theory called Goldbach Conjecture, a theory that no one in the world has been able to prove. Margaret's goal is to be the one who proves it, not only to make a name for herself, but also because she's a mathematical genius who strongly believes she's the one destined to solve it. We also find out that Margaret is an introverted person with no friends at all, and almost her entire life is devoted to science. On this particular day, she has an interview at her university. After the interview, she meets with Dr. Laurent, her advisor. Dr. Laurent asks her to help his students solve a very complex problem, and he encourages them to work as hard as Margaret does, calling her the most brilliant student he has. He announces that Margaret will be presenting her dissertation topic in the next lecture and asks the students to download a paper about Goldbach Conjecture to get some background on it. After the lecture, Dr. Laurent tells Margaret he wants to introduce her to a student named Lucas. He says that Lucas is just as brilliant in math and is working on his master's degree. He suggests that they collaborate so Lucas can help her with her research. But Margaret refuses, believing that he lacks the necessary experience in mathematical theories. During the lunch break, Margaret eats alone, as usual. Lucas approaches and asks her to go out with him. But of course, Margaret declines. She simply doesn't have time for such things, and she walks away. Later, Margaret returns to her dorm and continues studying through the night, as she always does. However, while working, she runs into a small issue with her dissertation. She decides to leave it for now, feeling that something about it isn't quite right. When she brings it up to Dr. Laurent, he tells her he's read her paper multiple times and found it correct, and that he doesn't have time to read it again. He urges her to let Lucas help her. She goes to Lucas, but finds him busy playing music with his friends. The next day, it's time for her dissertation presentation. We see Margaret discussing her research in front of a large group of students and professors. Everything seems to be going smoothly until Lucas interrupts. He points out a flaw in her work that she hadn't noticed, a flaw so significant that it invalidates the entire theory. She would have to start her research from scratch. Naturally, Margaret is devastated. 3 years of hard work gone because of one tiny oversight. Overcome with disappointment and frustration, she walks out of the presentation. Days pass, and we see that Margaret has fallen into a deep depression. She has lost all hope of completing her PhD. One day, Dr. Laurent visits Margaret and tells her that what she did was a mistake. She shouldn't have left the university, especially after coming so far in her attempt to prove the theory. But Margaret is still upset, believing that if he had reviewed her dissertation before the presentation, none of this would have happened. Dr. Laurent then suggests that it would be better for her to change the topic of her dissertation and choose something a bit easier. He informs her that he can no longer be her advisor, and that she needs to find someone else to supervise her work. He recommends continuing her research under a professor named Blanchard, saying that he personally spoke to him and that Blanchard is willing to start fresh with her. Margaret feels even more discouraged. She had desperately wanted to prove the theory, but at the same time, she doesn't have the energy to start all over again. She tells Laurent that she's decided to quit mathematics altogether and forget about her dissertation. Laurent warns her that this is a mistake. The university will require her to pay back all the expenses it covered over the past 3 years, and she'd be throwing away years of hard work. But Margaret doesn't care. She says she's ready to face the consequences of her decision and walks away. Sometime later, we see that Margaret has enrolled in a beauty course in an attempt to leave her old field behind. During class, the instructor asks the students to fill out a survey about the cosmetic products displayed in front of them. But Margaret and another girl named Noah challenge the idea. The instructor becomes annoyed by their attitude and ends up kicking them out of the course. From that moment, the two girls become friends. We learn that Noah works as a dancer at a nightclub and lives a very open, carefree lifestyle, the complete opposite of Margaret. Noah invites Margaret to move in with her, explaining that the rent on her current apartment has become too expensive. Margaret offers to pay 3 months of rent up front to earn Noah's trust. Noah agrees and takes her to see the apartment. At first, Margaret doesn't like the place. It's messy and chaotic, and she's used to living in clean, organized environments. But she has no other choice and agrees to stay. That evening, they go to meet the landlord to pay the rent, and Margaret notices he's playing Chinese poker with his friends. She finds the game interesting, downloads it on her phone, and ends up playing it for a long time. Later on, Margaret applies for a job at a clothing store and gets hired. While working there, she becomes intrigued by a guy who works with her, but she doesn't know how to express her feelings. She has no experience in relationships and has never been with anyone before. When she gets home, she tells Noah about the guy she likes and asks for advice on how to get closer to him. Noah gives her some tips on how to catch a man's attention. The next day, Margaret tries to follow all of Noah's advice, but she still fails to talk to the guy. After work, Lucas calls Margaret and tells her he read her dissertation and was really impressed. He asks her to return to her research and promises to help her fix the flaw she encountered, saying it would be a shame to let all that effort go to waste. But Margaret refuses. She tells him she's not going back to her PhD, and she ends the call, clearly upset. When Margaret returns home, she finds Noah getting ready to go to the nightclub where she works. Margaret decides to go with her to change the atmosphere. As soon as they enter the nightclub, Margaret is stunned by the world inside, as it's her first time in such a place, and she doesn't know how to interact with the people there. She stands off to the side, watching people dance and enjoy themselves, and soon, she notices a guy standing alone. She focuses on him throughout the night. When she sees him leaving the club, she follows him outside. The guy becomes concerned about her behavior and asks what she wants from him and why she's been following him for so long. Margaret admits that she's interested in him and wants to get to know him, but she has no experience with these things and doesn't know how to talk to him. He takes her to his place to get to know her better. The next day, Margaret arrives at work feeling happy, as it's the first time in her life she's spent the night with a guy. However, at that moment, her mother calls her and starts yelling at her because she found out from Dr. Laurent that Margaret left the university and will not be completing her dissertation. Margaret gets angry and argues with Dr. Laurent for revealing her situation to her mother. She tells him to stay out of her life and not interfere anymore. When Margaret returns home, she finds the landlord waiting for her on the stairs, yelling at her for being late with the rent. Margaret is surprised because she had given Noah the money to pay it. She asks Noah where the money went, and Noah confesses that she entered a big dance competition and had to use the money for the entry fee because she didn't have enough herself. Margaret starts to think of ways to make money, and an idea comes to her. She goes to the landlord and tells him that she'll play Chinese poker with his friends, and if she wins, she'll give him all the money, but if she loses, she'll leave the apartment. The landlord agrees to her proposal, and Margaret starts playing with his friends. To everyone's surprise, she wins every round, and she gives all the money she wins to the landlord. All the men are amazed by her performance because she's so skilled. The landlord offers her a chance to play poker at bigger clubs, promising to share a portion of the money she wins. But Margaret quickly returns home, as the poker game sparks a new idea to help her prove her mathematical theory. She stays up all night working on her theory, and as the days pass, we see that Margaret is playing poker daily at large clubs, earning a lot of money, while still working on her theory. One day, her mother visits her and learns that Margaret has started playing poker. Naturally, she's very concerned because her work is illegal and could cause many problems. However, Margaret reassures her, saying that she's happy with her work and there's nothing to worry about. She also tells her that playing poker helps her prove her theory. Later that night, Noah tells Margaret that she will be traveling for 2 weeks for a dance competition. Margaret encourages her, expressing confidence in her abilities and certainty that she will win. Afterwards, Margaret goes to take a shower, and by chance, she hears on the radio that Laurent will use Lucas's master's thesis to prove Goldbach's conjecture. The next day, Margaret meets Lucas at the university, apologizing for her cold behavior toward him lately, and asks him to come to her place to see something important. When they get to her place, Lucas is shocked to see that Margaret has come very close to proving the theory and has made significant progress. Margaret offers to let him help her prove the theory, but on the condition that he doesn't tell Laurent he's helping her, as Laurent had been exploiting her throughout the process to prove the theory and claim it as his own, after failing to prove it himself. Lucas agrees to her request. Days pass, and we see that both Margaret and Lucas are working on proving the theory, but they haven't been able to reach any conclusions. The atmosphere between them is still tense, and they haven't gotten used to each other yet. Of course, Lucas is uncomfortable with this situation. One day, he confronts her, saying that he's not comfortable with the boundaries she's set between them. He believes they should be more open with each other since they'll be working together for a long time, and this current situation isn't helping them work at all. Margaret admits that he's right, so she takes him out for dinner one day. She tells him that she's been obsessed with mathematics since she was a child, and that her mother, who is a math teacher, was the one who inspired her love for the field. When she was 9 years old, she started correcting exams with her mother. When her parents divorced, she decided to devote her life to mathematics so she wouldn't think about her father. Then, one day, she heard about Goldbach Conjecture and learned that the mathematician who created it couldn't prove it, as it's one of the hardest mathematical problems in the world. She decided then that she would be the first to prove it. Lucas also shares that no one in his family is good at mathematics. He's the only one who loved it and dedicated all his time to it. When he finds out that Margaret plays poker, he laughs and is very surprised because it doesn't match her personality at all. But Margaret explains that poker is her only source of income since she left the university, and that the game has inspired her a lot in her work on the theory. After dinner, they return home together and continue working on the theory. Days go by, and we see that their relationship has grown a lot, and they've become close. One day, Laurent is in the library and sees them together. He understands that they are still working on proving the theory, so he visits Margaret at her home and tells her that he has dreamed his whole life of proving Goldbach Conjecture. Sometimes, mathematicians can be selfish in their work, especially when someone surpasses them. He had hoped she would be the one to prove the theory, and he offers her the chance to return as a student and continue working with him on her dissertation. However, Margaret realizes from his words that he wants to exploit her again, using her to prove the theory and then taking credit for it himself. She refuses to work with him again. This rejection fuels her determination even more, giving her the motivation to keep going. One day, Margaret makes new breakthroughs in the theory. She reacts with intense excitement when she realizes she's getting close to solving it. She hugs Lucas, and they both rejoice in the progress they've made. That night, however, Margaret can't sleep due to overthinking. She feels like something is still wrong, so she reviews the results she's achieved and writes that she still hasn't solved the theory. She becomes extremely upset and anxious because her defense is in 2 weeks. Lucas wakes up to her distress and tries to calm her down, telling her she can defend her dissertation next year if she doesn't solve it this year. But Margaret explains that she has to defend her dissertation this year to prove to Laurent that she's smarter than him and to get back at him for abandoning her and trying to exploit her. Suddenly, their conversation turns into a big argument due to their differing perspectives. Margaret accuses Lucas of exploiting her, and she decides to break up with him. Lucas is deeply hurt by her words, especially because he had given up his studies and his dissertation to help her, but she didn't appreciate it. He leaves, saddened by her rejection. At night, Margaret goes to gamble as usual, but this time she's not focused and loses for the first time. Naturally, she becomes extremely angry and vents all her frustration into her studies. She spends days studying non-stop to the point that she starts writing all over the apartment. One day, Nawa returns home and finds Margaret in a terrible state. She advises her to move back in with her mother to calm down. Margaret agrees and moves in with her mother, but she continues studying obsessively. One day, Margaret confesses to her mother that she has fallen in love with her university colleague. Her mother is overjoyed because she's finally in a relationship, and she advises her not to let him go. One day, while Margaret is deep in thought, trying to solve the theory as usual, she sees something that finally leads her to the solution. Overwhelmed with joy, she immediately calls Lucas and tells him that they need to meet urgently. They meet at the university, and she tells him that she has finally solved the theory. Lucas takes her to the lecture hall to write the solution on the board. As Margaret writes the solution, everyone in the university gathers around, unable to believe that she has finally solved Goldbach's conjecture. When she finishes, the entire room bursts into applause, and everyone is incredibly proud of her. Laurent is among the crowd, and he's extremely proud of what she has achieved, repeatedly telling people with happiness that she was his student. Lucas is also happy for her, but he feels that she no longer needs him now that she's solved the theory. He decides to quietly withdraw and leaves the lecture hall. However, Margaret follows him, takes him in her arms, and finally admits that she loves him and can't live without him. He also confesses his love for her, and the story ends with a promise to see you in the next recap. If you love movies and movie recaps, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more. Hit like if you enjoyed the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.